This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Steadman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing great, man. You know what I was reflecting on a little bit earlier is that I've been connected to Henrique Teixeira on LinkedIn for, I don't know, quite a while. And you and I are both friends with Henrique, spend time with him. We're on stage with him at the Gartner IAM Summit. He's got over 9,000 followers on LinkedIn now. So anybody who's listening, if you're not connected, at least go out and follow Henrique. I mean, he's a major influencer in the space. And it's kind of just, scrolling through his feed of posts, and a couple things jumped out at me. The first was this IGA race that everybody wants to declare, past the finish line, not at the finish line. And they're, Gartner's still producing articles on like top 5 reasons IGA implementations fail, things like that. The other is that there's a IAM Summit in London in March 4th and 5th. I think we should go. What do you think?
I would love to go to London. London's awesome. I was there for a vacation last year. Henrique, Becky, if you guys are listening, we'd be happy to attend. Just let us know. We'll kind of figure that out. But yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we have lined up today?
Yeah, today we've got another sponsor spotlight episode. For those who aren't familiar, these are special bonus episodes that we create in collaboration with our sponsor. Lets us delve more deeply into their viewpoints, kind of specific solutions in the IAM market. I guess just to make it crystal clear, right? This is a fully sponsored episode. This is what gives us access to the movers and shakers with the sponsors that we work with. And in this case, today's sponsor is ConductorOne. ConductorOne helps organizations secure their workforce through modern access controls and identity governance. You can find them on the web at ConductorOne.com. And joining us today, we've got Alex Bovee. He's the CEO at ConductorOne. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time with us. And, it wouldn't be a normal Identity at the Center podcast without learning a little bit about the background of the folks that we have on. And that goes true here. How did you get into the world of identity? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Yeah, it chose me. I like to talk about it in terms of I was a security guy who kind of fell into identity. So my background was mostly in security. I was at a mobile security startup for a long time. And then was drawn to and went to Okta to help them develop their security products and practice, and spent about 5 years at Okta building out authentication, device-aware access, obviously SSO, some things around threat detection, and really just fell in love with the space. I'll be honest with you, I never thought of identity was something that I was going to really enjoy, but through my time at Okta, I just absolutely loved the complexity of it, the intricacies of it, how complicated of a space it was, and that led me to the ConductorOne experience. So zero regrets. It's really phenomenal. And now obviously there's a big convergence between identity and security, so it's fortuitous.
I find this is my theory is that a lot of people kind of around the same age that we are, without giving away any details, seem to have fallen into identity. It wasn't something specifically they chose. Every once in a while, I find a real weirdo who chose it. But for a lot of people, I think they kind of just, all of a sudden they were in identity and they didn't know it. They just were. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely people, I've never really heard a lot of people starting their career saying identity is something I want to do. I think, maybe there's different spaces around like B2B SaaS or consumer or something like that maybe you're excited about. But I think people who end up, brushing into identity, again, if you're really drawn to complex problems, hard problems, I think identity is just an absolutely fascinating space. And it's one of those things that the problem space continues to evolve, and there's so much opportunity there. So it's there's no shortage of just interesting problems to solve.
It's a great industry to be in. So I'm happy to recruit others into it, or draft, or whatever is needed to get more folks into it. But let's talk about ConductorOne, because I think you've got a pretty interesting story. Tell us a little bit about ConductorOne. How did it get started, and what is the problem that you guys are looking to solve for?
Yeah, we started ConductorOne about 3 years ago. I was at Okta just before that, really focusing on identity, but more from a productivity perspective. And obviously there's kind of security layers that are involved with securing single sign-on and cloud application access. But one thing that was pretty clear to me was that MFA and SSO were very insufficient to actually protecting the identity, which was rapidly becoming, at that time, the most important asset for companies. So I just kind of looked out and said, there was like even early days at that point, a lot of talk around identity kind of being the new perimeter. I don't think a lot of people knew what that meant, but if you thought about it from a security perspective, you realized, well, you need threat detection around it. You need better lifecycle around it. You just needed to solve a lot of these problems more from viewing identity as a security problem in the same way that devices were secured, right? And so that was really I think the inception and the thesis around ConductorOne is that identity needed a security layer. And, the name ConductorOne was actually a little bit of a derivative of that. So we saw this missing layer for securing identity. And the idea is, let's go build a company that understands all the technology and identities within a company's environment, and then helps you really orchestrate access and control and security across that environment. So that was the idea of ConductorOne, is the single conductor for your environment.
That's a pretty cool story. I love hearing the names of organizations and kind of how it came about. That's a good one for sure. What do you see yourselves as like, what's the sweet spot in the market for ConductorOne?
Yeah, another thing that was pretty clear when we were starting the company was that this was going to become a major problem, particularly for mid-market businesses. So businesses that are roughly 500 to maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000 employees. They've rapidly adopted the cloud, so their organizations have changed pretty dramatically. They care about security. They have this large footprint of identities across employees and maybe contractors, and they weren't necessarily excited about traditional solutions that help solve some of these problems, or they wanted just a more comprehensive end-to-end solution to actually protecting the identities and access within their environment. And so that's really where we focused. It's kind of these companies that they're too big to do things manually because the manual processes are really brutal, but they have complex environments that really require some sort of automation and security protection layer. And also they care about the data that they're managing, for obviously their customers and their infrastructure. And so it's security is important and paramount to them.
So Jim mentioned we've had conversations with Enrique and Becky over at Gartner, and we talked about Magic Quadrants. And one of the questions that we asked them when we were on stage with them was, they stopped doing Magic Quadrants for IGA a few years back. And the question was sort of like, okay, well, does that mean, winners have already been crowned? Like, what are we doing here? And yet, as Jim mentioned, they keep putting out content at IGA. I guess it's a very competitive space. Why get into this identity governance space?
I love this question. Well, interestingly, to talk about Enrique for a second longer, they just published some research that talked about, I think 50% of IGA implementations being distressed, meaning customers are unhappy, they're over budget, they're, going long in the tooth in terms of like getting the implementation up and running. And so I think there's a disconnect there between sort of thinking and assuming that like the winner has been crowned. And yet this stat, when you act like the ground truth from customers is that customers are deeply unhappy with the technical solutions that they have in place. And that's not, from my perspective, that's not really a new trend. Actually, that was one of the early insights that we had when we started ConductorOne. When we went out and just did a lot of customer discovery and market discoveries, you would talk to companies, particularly in this mid-market segment, about the idea of implementing an identity governance solution. And they knew it was required. They knew they needed to do it, but they were really not particularly excited about the existing solutions in the space. So I think that was just in general an interesting ground truth signal that we saw that said, regardless of what the analyst community is saying and what's being written about online, the truth that we saw from talking to customers was that people were unhappy. They were unhappy with those solutions and they wanted different approaches. I think the other thing that we really observed is that there was a bit of a shift. But there was a shift from the traditional way companies wanted to do identity governance, which was very IT centric and very just focused on that governance problem, to then when you zoom up and you say, we need to secure identity more holistically. And what does that require? That requires privileged access. That requires obviously governance, compliance, and securing SaaS access. That felt like a bigger story as well. That was really going to transform and shift the way that companies wanted to handle the governance problem. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we continue to see that.
I would agree with that. I think it's a very diplomatic term to use the word distressed. I see a lot of things on fire, maybe.
Sure,
you could probably call that as distressed. One other thing that I keep hearing about, and I want to give Jim an opportunity to jump in here, but before that is, I hear about legacy, modern, and next generation when it comes to capabilities. And especially it seems like identity governance is one of these areas as well. I mean, what is the difference? What makes something legacy versus modern or even next gen? Because I feel like we have to cut sometimes through this marketing speak and say, okay, this is next gen. It's 100% more AI, or, oh, that's a legacy. And it came out like 5 years ago, right? Help me understand that, those definitions from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, I sort of have the same skeptical eye towards a lot of marketing buzzword terms. We cycle through in the security industry different. It was like zero trust for a while, and then it was like next gen things for a while. So that's I think a way for new vendors to kind of differentiate themselves from existing solutions. I do think that there is meat there, though. If you just start at what's broken with sort of traditional, and I won't use the word legacy, but like traditional IGA solutions, what are some of the challenges there? And back to that ground truth, I think it's things like a huge amount of complexity, an overwhelming amount of customization required, really long implementation cycles to get them going, not particularly attractive or exciting user experiences. I'm trying to be diplomatic in some of the words I'm using here.
It's working.
But, those are just some of the challenges. So I think even if you just start with that set of things and kind of flip it and say, well, how do you do that better? Well, you have quick implementations, you have opinionated data models, you have beautiful user experiences. I think that's a set of things of improvements that really kind of differentiate this next generation of identity governance. But I think it goes a little bit further, even in my opinion. I think recognizing that identity governance is just a part of the identity security story means you also have to embrace everybody who's using that platform and needs to take advantage of that platform to secure identity and access within an environment. And so you can't, as a very tactical example, you have to treat technical user access or developer access or like kind of developer constructs, like having an API and the ability to extend the platform and build integrations and so forth. It's really like a primary use case. It can't be an afterthought that's sort of built on the platform. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity, again, to fix the issues that were ground truth issues from customers, but then really say, if you're going to reinvent this category, how would you do it? Well, I'd make it super developer friendly. I'd make it for the whole organization. I'd have APIs. I would use LLM and Copilot and sort of some of these more modern technologies and in a more thoughtful way. And that's how we think about next generationing identity governance.
Yeah, that was a really good overview, but I want to geek out about the platform a little bit. And, I went out to your website. First off, it's a really sharp looking website and really, there's a lot there. But I also really like the blog. So I did start digging into some of the articles, but not everybody's going to do that. So I want to ask you the question pretty simply, like, what does the product do? What does ConductorOne do?
Yeah, we think about our capabilities in terms of a handful of scenarios. I mean, our products that we sell are products like access review automation, access control automation, just-in-time access control. Those are just kind of the use cases, for the lack of a better term, in terms of like things that customers buy. But I think more broadly, you could think about our platform as solving a suite of traditional identity governance problem statements, from compliance to lifecycle automation, provisioning, and so forth. And then a suite of more privileged access, more modern privileged access use cases. And so that's where you start to fold in just-in-time access and zero-standing privilege. And then the last set of capabilities that we're pretty excited about are things like really giving a lot more visibility into the identity and permission environment within a company's organization. Because I think one of the hardest challenges that companies have is just really understanding who has access to what and what are my security issues and risks. And so aggregating that data is it's a hard problem.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that's always been the core use case of the traditional IGA is like who has access to what. One place to go to figure that out. You mentioned access requests, access reviews. I mean, that's kind of like table stakes functionality for an IGA. You also mentioned the privilege access management and getting to, zero standing privileges or just-in-time requests. I think that's huge. Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, zero-standing privileges is something that we've been talking about for a while. And frankly, I'm super amped up that it, as a term and as a concept and a focus area, it's getting more attention because I really do think there was this almost misplaced focus for a long time on the idea of least privilege access. And the idea of least privilege access is really reshaping roles and permissions to like get, to really winnow down the amount of privilege and that a role has or that a user has at a specific time. I think that the challenge and the missed opportunity there is that 95% of the time, people just shouldn't have access at all. Like they're not using it. They're not like, I like to ask the question, why do your engineers have production access to AWS while they're asleep? It's kind of just doesn't make any sense. So what just-in-time access really helps with is helps companies to achieve that zero standing privilege methodology pattern, if you will, and objective by making sure that users can request and elevate permissions in a just-in-time fashion based on a justification. I do think just-in-time is kind of a part of that puzzle, but it's not the whole part of the puzzle. So things like removing access when it's unused, that's really important. I obviously identifying over privilege is really important. Moving to just-in-time is really important. And then the flip side of that is equally important, which is making sure people can get the access back, because if you're going to remove it, people are going to kick and scream unless they know that it's like a couple clicks away to actually get the permissions back.
I agree with one of the points you made in there. It's like it's one of the puzzle pieces, not the whole puzzle, but it's a pretty darn big piece. I mean, I think back to kind of the traditional identity management systems, right? Before the IGA space existed. And the way it worked was, here's the central place. You go in and give people access, and then we provision it out. Then IGA came along and said, oh, you know what you can do is collect all this data, bring it together, and govern it. In other words, you can go one place to find out who has access to what, and then it started to build the provisioning side, but you don't have to provision to every application. And the reason the old way kind of was replaced by the new way was you can't just stick something in the middle and have a monolith, right? And I think that just like you're not seeing, no one's coming up with new proxy products, right? Like, hey, we're going to stick this appliance here and everybody route their traffic through that. And I think privileged access management is up for the same upheaval, right? You can't just throw a proxy appliance on the network and say, oh, all privileged access needs to route through that. You're not going to solve enough of the problem to make it the right solution. Architecturally speaking, in my opinion, you guys are approaching it from a very important angle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is one of the shifts that's happened in the last few years that people are starting to really appreciate, is that traditional approach to privilege access management really doesn't translate very well to the cloud. And there's some key differences. I think traditional privilege access management was really, it was very credential centric. I'm going to nerd out for a second on like credentials and tokens and like that kind of stuff. But the credential meaning an SSH key or a password or something like that. And the idea is that if you needed some sensitive access to some system, you were going to check out this credential, and then you're going to log into the system and then perform some privileged action or set of functions. And then you're going to log out, and then hopefully you were going to check that credential back in. And then really hopefully that credential is going to be rotated. And I think in the cloud, it's almost a little bit of an ENT pattern. Because in the cloud, the perimeter is not the credential, the perimeter is the identity. And so it's the identity that's logging in. And then the question of privileged access is really, what is that identity allowed to do? What actions are they allowed to perform, which is an authorization problem. And so the way that you manage that, to your point, is not by putting a proxy in front of it and, injecting credentials or anything like that. It's really about escalating permissions at the SaaS or the cloud layer just in time to give people the access they need to perform the functions, and then automatically de-escalating that access when they no longer need it. And frankly, I think that is a million times of a better world. How many times have systems and companies been breached because a credential was accidentally checked into a public GitHub repo? Or, there's all sorts of problems. Like the problem with credentials is that they're not fundamentally protectable. They're bearer tokens, right? For the lack of a better term. And so you can accidentally share them, and then you've accidentally effectively shared the permissions and the privileges.
Man, that's really smart. I think that use case you just described there, especially on the cloud applications, makes a ton of sense to me. I also just made myself a little footnote here that you had a blog on this topic around practical approach to achieving zero standing privilege. We'll put the link to that in the show notes, but that covered a lot, I think, of what you were just talking about there, right? So I'm not going to ask you to kind of regurgitate that, but another thing that I noticed on your website was this new AI Copilot for identity governance. And, I mean, you referenced it a little bit, but that got my juices flowing. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the interesting things we've done on the LLM side is really looked at obviously this is the new technology development in the last year and a half. So I think anytime that happens, it's an opportunity to really look at your existing technology and stack and say, how can we make what we're doing fundamentally better by using this new technology? And LLMs are no different. So when all the ChatGPT technology dropped and took the world by storm, we took a step back and said, how can we use this in the identity security and identity governance space to really fundamentally transform some of the traditional problems that folks have solved in maybe non-ideal ways. And some of those were a little bit more obvious things like recommendations and insights that you can generate around like access requests and access controls in general. Some of the less obvious things, but more of the magical experiences, are things like help desk automation. So our Copilot, for example, ties into the help desk and then picks up requests from the help desk and automatically processes them using the ConductorOne engine for something like an access request, gets the approvals, provisions it. So you go from this process where maybe you had an IT person or a help desk person who had to inject themselves into the access request or into the help desk process. They're processing a ticket, they're looking at it, they're going into an IGA tool, and maybe they're doing something there, to really just a completely hands-free, like zero touch process. And I think that's just an opportunity. That's an example of where you can apply LLM technology and AI technology to really fundamentally transform the way that business is being done. It's also worth mentioning too that we looked at solving this exact same problem maybe two and a half years ago, before the LLMs, before all the AI technology came out. And we actually decided against it because we felt like we couldn't make the experience better enough to really justify the investment. And so when the LLM technology came out, we used it. It's really a magical experience.
So you have me at AI and you got me at LLM because I have been such a bull when it comes to sort of this really disrupting the identity space. So I'm excited to see this because I think if you've listened to this podcast over the last year or so, we've joked about AI at the center and some of the the subtopics that we get into sometimes because it has been such an impactful thing on our industry. I am super excited to see this because one of the first things I thought about when I saw this was like, okay, when is this going to hit products? We've heard of AI in the past, like, oh, our thing has AI. And for me, at least, the definition of AI changed when I saw what LLMs like ChatGPT and Lambda and, Google's version of it, Bard, came out, and it became, oh, okay, that's different. That's cool. For me, AI used to be like, oh, that's just pattern matching and machine recognition and kind of stuff like that. Important, yes. But now we're in a totally different ballgame, and I'm excited to see where this kind of takes us. I'm terrified where it's going to take us because it might put me out of a job. I don't know, but the functionality is very cool. I guess from your perspective, does that definition of AI changed for you like it has for me over the last year or so?
It has. I think. Look, I'm a sort of marketing skeptic at heart. So you're going to reveal my inner self here, but I always get a little skeptical when companies like sprinkle AI dust on things or sprinkle next generation on things, and because you really have to peel back the onion and say, well, what does that actually mean? I think statistical analysis and analytics; those are great things to incorporate. I think the true, unique, net new set of functionality and capability that LLMs bring to the table is this ability to process speech and unstructured text and then to do something with it. And so if you just look in the IGA context, well, where is that really useful? Well, that's useful, obviously, when you're interacting with a chatbot. I think the chatbot is a little bit of, I think it's a little bit of a bug in the system, though, because it's almost like too obvious. And so then if you scratch it a layer deeper and you say, where are there sort of language problems or issues in traditional governance technologies, that's where it gets really interesting. And so I think some of those are in use cases like help desk. I think some are just in use cases around understanding effective access and sort of like downstream access for users. And so there's just lots of really cool applications there.
Well, I think one of the things that the IAM practitioners and managers out there are struggling with is getting more done with less. And what I mean by less is fewer resources, right? I haven't talked to an IAM practitioner recently where adding headcount would be an acceptable answer. So really, I think that's where AI's got to fit. I think, Jeff made the joke about like replacing our jobs. And I think it's actually just going to make us able to do a lot more in the long run. Is that kind of your approach as well?
I think so. I think there's always a fear when automation gets really good that it decreases the jobs. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, we sell a product that both helps customers automate tons, but then also makes them more secure. And no one has ever implemented ConductorOne and then like fired people. That's not a thing. Because really what it lets you do, I think it does something so much more meaningful, which is it lets people not focus on the really boring, non-useful work and instead focus on the more meaningful things. Nobody wants to sit there. Most companies have something like 40 or 50% of their help desk tickets are just access requests. Imagine not having to do that job and instead focusing on other more meaningful information technology tasks and requests and other automation you can build in your company. So what we see far more often is that it just saves time and effort on kind of the manual tasks and then lets you, it really improves kind of your job satisfaction because you're spending more time on more interesting problems.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo this. I've never been part of a IGA deployment specifically where people were automated out of a job. I think that's something we've heard about for, I feel like 20 years now. It's like, oh, we're going to put this thing in and we're going to automate onboarding and offboarding and we're going to be able to reduce headcount. It doesn't happen in the real world. What ends up happening is you are doing more with the same people you've had. And I think roles change a little bit too. I think the way that I've been through this process myself, as a practitioner in the real world was this mindset shift. It went from I'm an administrator to, oh, now I'm an analyst. I've taken the administrative tasks out of those things. And now I'm using my brain more, for better or for worse, to think about things and are things being done correctly? Are there improvements we need to make rather than, oh, let me create yet another Lotus Notes account. That's how far back I go. Or another mainframe account on RackF or things like that, right? Stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. We can automate, but I still think there's this space for people to think about it. And I think this is where, I jokingly say, hey, getting out of a job, I think the job is going to change. I think the jobs as we know it today are going to change. And if you're not leveraging AI, you're going to be behind and you're going to have to figure out how to do that. So I don't want to get too hung up on the AI stuff because I think it may be too much, right, to kind of talk about right now. But I love the idea of this, and I'm really excited to see where it goes next for you guys.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And completely echo your sentiment. I think it just makes the work more meaningful, more interesting. There's a lot less tedious kind of click ops associated with roles. And everyone who's in an IT or security team, it's not like you don't have a backlog of projects that you want to get done. So really what it does is it frees that time up so that you go work on really important kind of next projects to either make the system run better or, to your point, work on other more meaningful projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you were making, Jeff, about basically like machine learning, and I think Alex, you said about like let's just sprinkle a little AI dust. Where I've seen a lot of the like, oh, we have AI in our IGA product. It can look at your data and say, oh, 80% of the people like you have this role, so you should have that role too. That is garbage. That is not AI. I'm sorry. There's nothing whiz bang about that. That to me is not meaningful. And I'm glad you guys are taking a different approach.
Yeah, the statistical analysis has its place for sure. And I'm not one to knock it. I think if it helps you make better decisions, that's great and you should do it. But I really do think there's an opportunity to transform some of the more painful processes from an automation standpoint and just do it a little bit better.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm off my soapbox. One thing I love is when people come onto our podcast and announce some news. So you have a little bit of news about a major enhancement to your product that's coming out today, the day that this drops. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah. So we are really excited to announce our Access Fabric capability. And what the access, is it okay if I talk a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Swaddle us in your Access Fabric.
I will swaddle you in the fabric. Yeah. So one of the recognitions, and I would say things that we embraced as a company early on, was this idea that identity and access is messy. Kind of this view that all identities are in the single directory and that directory knows everything about the world is just a complete, it's not true for the overwhelming majority of companies. Most companies have on-prem systems or cloud infrastructure that may not be connected to a directory. You have these very complex environments. The HR systems may be connected to directories or not. You might have contractors in different systems. So long story short, there's this real data aggregation problem when it comes to identity and understanding permissions and authorizations within an environment, any environment. And we've made a lot of investments over time to really be able to reach out and connect to and talk to all of these different systems, whether those are cloud applications or SaaS applications or on-prem directory HR systems, whatever it is, and really pull all that data into a single place. And that place is what we call the Access Fabric. So we really think of it as a platform capability first and foremost. Again, it's an aggregation of identities, permissions, authorizations, account information across a customer's entire environment. And so that in and of itself, I think is like, that's cool. But then, well, like, what does it do? And what I'm really excited about is the capabilities that powers for our customers. So illustratively, along with the Access Fabric, we're shipping a tool called the Access Graph. We're very creative with naming. And what the Access Graph allows you to do is ask sophisticated questions about your identity environment. Can you show me orphaned accounts? Can you show me users who are terminated in the HR system who have local accounts? Can you show me non-MFA enabled local accounts in AWS? Can you show me the effective access chain of how a user is granted the specific permission in the SaaS application or cloud application? So what's beautiful is that it gives you that insight into all the identities and permissions within your environment, allows you to ask questions. And then we've always been building our products on top of that access fabric. So all the access controls and access review automation really runs and is powered by that data layer as well. So it's just it's a really neat capability. Something like the access graph is probably most closely synonymous with like a CIM type solution, a CIEM solution, if you're familiar with that. But it's really nice and easy to get up and running, and we're just really excited about it. I think it's an important part of solving the identity security problem.
So when I hear about like a graph, I'm thinking of like a graph database similar to like Facebook's graph or Microsoft's graph. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, you are. You could think of it as like node leaf type relationships, right? Where you can understand all those different relationships. Part of the challenge with identity is it's very complicated. You can have groups that are members of other groups that then grant permissions to other groups that are skimmed to other systems. And so identity on the surface seems like a very simplistic idea, right? Like, I have users, and then those users have different roles or permissions within systems. And I think if you were really reductive, that's the case. But the reality is when you start sprinkling in LDAP and data warehouse technology, where if you just pull on the Snowflake example, you have roles that belong to other roles that grant different tables and column permissions. That ends up just being like a very non-human scale problem to understand all of those different relationships. And what we saw is that security teams and IT teams, it's almost like an intractable problem to try to get that holistic view in a single place, because you may not many times be the system owner for those different applications. Being able to pull that data in is a challenge unto itself. And so, yes, it is as a long answer, but it is a graph type relationship behind the scenes.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that, this is the stuff of big tech, right? When you talk about the companies that have this, like they're Google, Microsoft, Facebook, built on the graph. And all right, I'm definitely getting outside of my element here, right? But it seems to me that the advantage of the graph is you're not in this structured SQL table structure that says, all right, well, now we want to start doing this new thing. We want to start storing these new types of documents. Like that could like break your SQL relationships, or, if you're in a SaaS model, forget about it, right? Or it's like re-engineering on top of it, but the graph model fits that perfectly. So this gives your platform like the ability to kind of roll with the punches, I'll say, like, in other words, like come up with functionality that you don't even know what it's going to be yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key there, and this is a little bit on the technical detail, the key is getting that data model correct. I think it's actually a harder problem than most people appreciate. Again, like the most simplistic reductive view of identity is you have an identity and then you have like a role. But I think the reality is that you have principles, these like identity speak, and principles can have relationship with other principles. And those principles can have roles, and those roles might grant or have authorization and permissions to different data elements. So it really is this very complex data structure. And once you get that data structure right, you can build integrations that pull and ingest data into that data structure in a very streamlined, seamless way. So one thing we didn't really talk too much about, but one of the biggest technical advancements that we've made as a company, and I'm really excited about it, is how we've approached the integration pattern. So we don't treat any of our integrations as closed source sort of integrations. We publish them actually as an open source project called Baton. In our platform itself, we deploy those all as agentless connectors. So you don't have to worry about that That's kind of an implementation detail for us. But what that Baton interface allows customers to do then is to very quickly support back office portals or homegrown applications. Or the Baton connector, our open source connectors, is how you would deploy like an Active Directory agent that connects to your infrastructure and syncs data. So the Baton connector itself speaks that data language, if you will, and then can push that data up to the ConductorOne cloud, and then you get that full visibility across the access fabric.
You mentioned when you were talking about Access Rabbit kind of early on that you'd be able to basically query it, ask it questions. What's the interface for that? Is it literally like using large language models to say, yes, show me this thing? Are we at the Star Trek phase where I can say, computer, show me all orphaned accounts and it will know what I'm talking about?
It's funny. We're getting there. That right now, the interface is very deeply integrated into the product. So we have a security dashboard, and you can see orphaned accounts at a glance. I could click into that. I can explore them. I can open it up in the Access graph. So that's all part of that product experience. But one of our guiding philosophies with how we build product is about meeting customers where they are. And so if you think about where there's other places where you might want to ask that question. You might actually have a help desk flow that someone says, hey, are there any orphaned accounts or accounts with no MFA enabled that I need to go remediate? Or maybe you ask that in Slack and you tag it with a ConductorOne logo, and we can kick off our Copilot experience to answer that question and link them into the graph. So I think the possibilities are endless. I don't know if it's speaking to your computer exactly to say that, but you could certainly type out the question and get the answer. And I think the opportunity to innovate is it's pretty deep, and it's really exciting on the product level.
That's so cool. I'm looking forward to seeing this in action. Let's talk about meeting customers where they are, because I think the natural question is, okay, what does this look like? How is this set up? So I kind of want to get a little bit into the ConductorOne architecture, maybe just kind of briefly. What does this look like? Is it a tenant that I subscribe to, and then there's some sort of proxy in my environment that kind of facilitates communication? How does this work with other, integrated targets? You mentioned Baton and maybe being agentless. Help me understand visually kind of what this looks like.
Yeah. So our platform starts first and foremost with our cloud SaaS control plane. So you can think of the control plane as being the orchestration, the automation, and then the Access Fabric product. Within that control plane, we also host the agentless connector. So when you want to add integrations to your other cloud or SaaS environments, it's just a point and click configuration to, let's say, get it connected up to AWS or Coupa or NetSuite or whatever the tool might be. And then those connectors have the ability to live outside of our control plane as well. So that's how we really support on-prem or deep infrastructure environments. If a customer is running, let's say, an on-prem Active Directory, or they have a Postgres database or an LDAP server, and they need to connect that up to the Access Fabric and run orchestration and access control and governance, that then is not you don't have to deploy our full product there, but you basically deploy just a single connector within your environment. You can run those connectors in lots of different modes. There's a lot of kind of technical flags, if you will. So you can tell us whether you want to enable that connector to do provisioning, for example. If you've got it connected up to ConductorOne, it's your LDAP, and you want to enable us to do provisioning, or Postgres, and you want us to do provisioning of user accounts. Those are kind of different running modes, if you will, for the connectors. But outside of that, it's pretty straightforward because it is that SaaS architecture, which means it's pretty straight. It's multi-tenanted. So, we can create a new customer tenant with an enrollment code. And then the only complexity really from there is just getting systems connected.
How long does it take to get set up on something like this? Because I think, we talked a little about traditional and kind of legacy IJ in the past. I got to imagine it's gotten a lot better. We're trying to save some of those maybe distressed, to be politically correct from a deployment standpoint. What's it like to get this thing stood up and running? And I guess help define what does up and running mean to you when it talks about your platform.
Yeah, definitely. So up and running to us means they're live with whatever product they bought. So whether that's Access Review or Controls or Self-Service or JIT, we really think about up and running and live, meaning you've deployed to your end user customer base and they're doing the thing that they were looking to do. We've had customers go live in a day. I really mean that. Now, that may not be the end-to-end environment of every single one of their applications, but many times, let's say running Access Reviews, we literally actually had a customer, I think 2 weeks ago, go live in a day with 2 applications that they wanted to run on the Access Review side. And the reason you can do that is because of really 3 things. One is agentless connectors that you can just hook up to your environment, opinionated data model, and then a user experience that just works and is simplistic for the end user. So when you combine those three things, it's really trivial to get up and running there. Where it can be a little bit longer to get up and running is if you have on-prem systems and connecting more applications. Generally speaking, the long pole in ConductorOne deployment is truly just connecting up all the different technology. So if you've got a couple of AWS accounts, and there you can Terraform the configuration into that to let it talk to ConductorOne, but usually there's like another party involved there. If you've got an Active Directory on-prem, you have to deploy a container or Windows service to connect to that. So that's usually the quote unquote long pole in deployment. But that being said, overwhelming majority of customers are live in less than a month or two with the product that they bought, kind of end to end for the full scope of things that they were looking to do.
That's nuts. I mean, if I think back to my first IGA deployment about 15 years ago, it was a 2.5 year, 3 year project. And you're absolutely right. The long pole is always application integrations, right? That's not specific to ConductorOne. Any identity application, it's, you want to connect it to as many things as we can. It just means, hey, we have more time to put that in place. So the fact that you could be up and running in a month now, is absolutely bonkers in my head. But it's great for customers, right? Because I think that eats into the time that it used to take to show value. What are we getting for our money? What is the risk that we're reducing? When did we stop talking and start doing? And the faster and the shorter you can make that, I think just makes it so much better.
And I think it also just highlights why it's so important to be able to go live with incremental use cases. So whether that's self-service application requests or just-in-time access for reviews or monitoring or SOD, whatever the use case might be, the value of having a platform that's quick to implement means that you can actually unlock those use cases pretty quickly. I think part of the challenge with the stress IGA implementations is many times the scope's just so big, and to just even get an incremental amount of value, you got to do all this platform work before you can realize that single use case. And so we really flipped it on its head and said, how do we make it so it's dead simple to get something up and live and running and get the use case deployed, get customers seeing value really quickly, because that's the way that we're going to make non-distressed IGA deployments. I
guess, because I'm sold, I want to try this out. I'm on your website and I'm looking, I see a button here that says start a free trial. Talk me through how I can test this out.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple ways. One is we have a lot of click-through walkthroughs on the webpage, and we're actually going to be doing even more than that. We also have very transparent documentation. We just very much believe in being very front-footed about the capabilities of the product. You can learn about the product very quickly. And then in terms of actually getting up and running, submit a free trial request. We do have a salesperson jump on and chat just to make sure it's a good fit and that we can actually help you from a pain point perspective and use case perspective. And then we run POCs and trials all the time with customers. Again, literally our POC kickoffs are an hour. Customers usually are up and running within that hour and they're testing it out. That's it. It's not hard.
It's a great way to take the distress out of an IGA deployment. You kind of stole my thunder because I was clicking around and I saw the guided walkthrough of the product tour. And I'm looking at it and it says, we'll give you a quick overview of automated access reviews and just-in-time access requests. And it looks like I can click through sort of the interface in that guided so I can see, this is what the product looks like. This is how you set it up. And so, I'm assuming, look how easy it is to configure to be up and running, that quickly, which is a really nice touch. I love it when, products in the space walk me through things and say, okay, show me what it looks like. Don't tell me about it. Show it to me. And I love it when I see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think we are trying to shine a light on some of the challenges in the traditional IGA space. And I think the best way to do that is just to be super transparent, open, and honest with customers and make it really easy to see value and be successful.
How dare you be transparent with customers? You're crazy, man. I'll put a link in our show notes so that if people want to check it out from a free trial perspective, it'll be super easy for people to click in over and kind of find it. But I would definitely encourage people to check it out. Alex, you've been amazingly generous with your time and kind of getting into the details of what's come out. Super excited about the announcement for Access Fabric. That's super cool. Can't wait to kick the tires on that. It would not be an Identity at the Center podcast without ending on a lighter note. I know that you're into guitars, and we kind of talked about what we want to talk about here, but let's kind of close out with this lighter note question of, if you could have a jam session with any guitarist, living or dead, who would it be and why?
I'm going to cheat and actually answer with two guitarists, which is Scott and Seth Avett, the Avett brothers. I'm a big kind of folky music fan. I play a lot of cowboy chords. And so I love Avett Brothers music. It's easy to play, but it's super enjoyable. And I would jam out with them for days.
So I can't say that I'm familiar with the Avett Brothers. I guess what do I need to know about them so I can check them out?
They are it's like bluegrassy, folky music. So it's like, Lumineers are kind of stomp clap music, but they're like, kind of clap music without the stomp. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's just, you got to be into that kind of thing. It's a lot of guitar. It's a lot of finger picking. They play a little bit of, like the mandolin, and they play a little bit of, the banjo too. So it's like very kind of simplistic, folk and bluegrassy music, but just really great lyrics and easy to play and like super enjoyable. That's
cool. Jim, if you had to pick to have a jam session, which guitarist are you going with?
Yeah, and so I probably wouldn't participate in the jam session, but here's some people I'd like to meet because they're awesome for whatever reason. So I like country music too. So Johnny Cash is definitely on that list. New music, Riley Green. But probably if I had to pick one, it would either be Jerry Garcia or Trey Anastasio, who is the lead from Phish. And I mean, those guys are just like, were born with a guitar in their hands.
Hey man, I grew up, my formidable years were in the years of jam bands. So I remember Phish very well.
Yeah.
8-minute long Phish songs and Dave Matthews Band songs. That was the thing.
Yeah, I couldn't play any of them, but I liked listening.
I have a guitar behind me in my office here. I cannot play anything other than like the first couple of chords of Seven Nation Army. I just can't pick it up. But I think, I am deeply appreciative of people who spend the time to learn an instrument and have gotten good at it, because I have tried several times over the years to try and learn guitar and I just haven't gotten it done. I'm not a country music person. In fact, I would probably go more the rock route. I'm thinking Dave Mustaine would be killer to kind of sit with. And it would definitely be me just kind of one chord and making sure my hand doesn't move to try and not look too stupid and let just Dave do his wizardry on the guitar itself. Or maybe somebody like Kirk Hammett. I'm definitely on the rock side of things.
But a Jimmy Page.
I want something heavier, harder, the crunch of a metal guitar.
Yeah, he's run of the mill. Jimmy Page, run of the mill.
That's elevator music at this point.
But hey, everybody gets to choose their own.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why it's a lighter note. Okay, we're going to go ahead and leave it there for this episode. Alex, thank you so much for being part of this. We're going to have a bunch of links in our show notes for people to check out. Hopefully people go over there and take a look at things, take a look at, starting a free trial, go through the guided tour, read up on the new exciting announcement, Access Fabric, and all the plethora of AI goodness that's coming out of that, which is fantastic. You can learn about ConductorOne at ConductorOne.com. Great name again. Love the story behind it. And you can listen to us on the web, idacpodcast.com, and at Twitter, IDAC Podcasts. With that, we're going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you so much, Alex, for being part of this. And we'll talk with everyone else in the next one.
Jeff and Jim, thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.